Hi, welcome back, and we're returning to our study on the need for due diligence. The first study in a series on spiritual due diligence, asking important questions of the Bible and finding out if the God of the Bible is who He says He was and whether He should have any influence in our lives at all. And we start with the need for due diligence, the first study, and we move today to the second lesson, which is reasons to resist. And so I, Jeff Hopper, am sitting here with my friend Jeffrey Cranford, and together we'll talk again in a way that hopefully sparks some thinking for you as you move into this second lesson, Reasons to Resist, Part 2. And Jeff, we talked the other day about, in our last lesson, about the fact that if you do spiritual due diligence, you'll eventually come to a point of faith or belief, perhaps. But I wonder if there are things maybe that would allow somebody to do the due diligence, ask the questions, explore the Bible, and come to another conclusion. And do we allow for that?
Well, certainly there's an allowance for that. I mean, if you think about it, there's this whole concept of free will, of decision making. It's the sovereignty of God versus the free will of man. So is it allowable? Of course it's allowable. There's no question that it's allowable. You think about it, I even think about the rich young ruler, that came to Jesus. And obviously he sensed something in Jesus. He wanted to do more of his due diligence. He actually asked the question, what shall I do? I need to be made complete, he was asking. And Jesus said, to be made complete, go and sell all you have and come and follow me. And at this point, the due diligence process, at least from the story that we're given, we don't know what transpired afterwards. There was a stopping in the process. There was a reason to resist, if you will. It was just, I got my stuff and I got my power and I enjoy my life in this world and I don't want to give it up. And Jesus made this clear as well in the parable about the sower. He said, some of the seed is planted in various types of soil. And at various points the soil responds in a positive way. Sometimes it responds, they hang on to something, but then the deceitfulness of riches and the worries of the world kind of choke it. And so, but the question is, can a person be along this path of spiritual due diligence and draw a different conclusion? And I think clearly that is an opportunity and an openness that God gives all of us. He gives us all the opportunity to say no. Or you say, well, I'm just approaching this from an intellectual perspective and I can't get beyond a certain point. Of course, my sense and my beliefs is so powerful that it is in fact true, that I feel if you keep pursuing, you'll even be able to answer questions. There are always impasses. In fact, there are seasons in life when we may find that we've stalled on the journey. And I think one of the things that we see in people who have resisted in the Bible is that they oftentimes may stall on the journey at the moment, but then maybe pick up later. Nicodemus comes to mind. Nicodemus started his spiritual quest with Jesus at nighttime. He didn't want any of his fellow Pharisees to realize what he was doing. And he pulls back for a second and says, I'll engage this, but certainly in the privacy of the night, in the cover of the night.
Sure.
But what we do see later is that Nicodemus reemerges, and our time is always, we think right now. But right now you may pursue for a while, not feel totally that you found what you're looking for or that you found truth, but it may force you to file something that God then reinstigates or reinitiates a year down the road or 2 years. In fact, I think about my own experience. There were things that were filed with me, some due diligence I did even as a child, and it would have appeared in the mid part of my life that there was nothing, there was no fruit, there was nothing that was growing. And yet in God's sovereignty, and that's where you balance this, God's still sovereign. And those whom He chooses do end up coming to Him. And yet there's a free will aspect to it too. So there's a competing interest here, I think, or a competing, not interest is not the right word, but a competing but yet complementary. They may seem to compete in our minds, but they're complementary to God. My sense is that if you do have places of resistance at this point, pursue them, pursue the answers to those questions, or at least a deeper due diligence, and recognize that you may not come to the full conclusion now, but it may be 2-3 years down the road that God in His sovereignty brings just the right man or just the right article or just the right something into your life at a particular point that then consummates your feeling about that and then consummates the relationship that you would then have with Jesus. So reasons to resist now may feel very powerful, but in 2 years they may seem almost as if they were never existent.
Right. Let me ask you this, though. I think because I think some of you may be wondering this. urgency. I mean, you talked about from your childhood to now, and we lay these out and say, well, take many weeks to study this but is there any degree of urgency that we should have in investigating this?
Well, if you even imagine there's a possibility that it's true, there's definitely a sense of urgency. What could be more primary? What could be more significant than the pursuit of God, if in fact He exists? What could be more silly than the pursuit of God if He doesn't? But one of the ways that I look at it, and it's the way to look, I look tomorrow with urgency. As I view, because I'm constrained to time and space. So I don't know what's going to happen 30 minutes from now. I can speculate, but I don't know. Mm-hmm. So in a sense of what's going to happen in the immediate future, I need to grasp with urgency. But from the perspective of looking back, I realize that, in fact, it was all God. Whether I was urgent, not urgent, and it's this kind of difficult dynamic that exists between I do have free will to make a decision to pursue God, but then as I look back in my life, all of a sudden I recognize, well, it was actually God drawing me towards Himself the entire time. So it's both are true, and yet, so yes, I face tomorrow with a sense of urgency, but I look back at yesterday and the days and the months that go by and go, God always had me squarely in His hand, loved me, was drawing me to Himself. And I think that's how I kind of view that.
Right. Thank you, Jeffrey. I think you know from the way that he's spoken that this is a very personal matter for Jeffrey, that it has been for him a personal journey, and for both of us, and for many others that we know as well. And today's lesson, the second lesson in Reasons to Resist, explores some of the personal reasons you may have for resisting doing spiritual due diligence. And we hope that as you study this, you may be able to put some of those reasons aside and go on and investigate the God of the Bible.